Is it on now? Mom?
Yeah, go ahead, Larry.
Mom?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Mom, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. And I had to tell him what I did to save you from more sorrow. I am so sorry to the families of the girls that I killed. I want them to know I'm so sorry. And I pray every day for their daughter's soul. Mom, I love you with all my heart. And I'm so sorry that I turned out to be such a bad son. I just hope that you forgive me, Mom. I love you with all my heart. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm done.
My mother, unlike the other ladies, never went missing. She was seen the night before her murder. So even though the story is sad, that was something that I was happy about. Today has been the hardest thing I had to do in a long time. I'm doing it for you. For as long as I can remember, my mom worked at a chicken restaurant. Everybody in the community called my mom the chicken lady. And she would bring home chicken every day to the point where we didn't want to eat chicken anymore. But we had no choice. We ate the chicken. In our eyes, we had the perfect mom. We didn't know anything other than her being perfect. My mom's relationship with drugs, I can't pinpoint when it started, but I probably was like 12. We would get up in the morning and come downstairs after nights of her and her friends partying downstairs, and we would find little straws. We would play with them and collect them. But later on in life, we found out that they were using the straws to snort cocaine, basically. We didn't start realizing my mom had a drug habit until we started hearing it from other people. And like the kids be like, oh, that's why your mom on drugs. And we'll come to her defense, like, what are you talking about? Ain't nothing wrong with, our mom, your mom on drugs. But eventually, after a few years, we could tell the difference. But we always, in the back of your head, like, oh, she got time to, clean herself up. We seen her friends that used to get high with her when we were younger, like, we seen all of them turn their lives around. So, like, we were just patiently waiting on her turn. But her turn never came.
This is someone I was proud to walk up and down the street with, holding hands. Didn't care about what people would think about interracial relationship. It was just a loving relationship. No black, no white. It was That's what it's all about. I love you, Laura, and I miss you. Well, first time I laid eyes on Laura, I was at a basketball court. And Laura, she was just kind of outside the fence watching. And a friend of mine told me that she's interested in me. I looked over at her and I got bright-eyed, like, yeah, she's pretty. So I went over and we just started having a great conversation. She laughed, and I loved her laugh and that pretty smile she has. That was a great, warm feeling that I'll never forget. It was great. It went long after that. She told me she was pregnant. You know, we had more and more kids. There's 7 daughters and 1 son. She's a great mother. She was just a special person to me in my life. She was my woman. I was with her for 21 years. And some guy in the world had to ruin all that for me. That is not right, man. That is not right.
This is the picture of the burn pit where Larry burned the bodies. I get this question all the time, every year. For 15 years, that exact same question. Why didn't anybody in the neighborhood notice that he was burning bodies? Well, when you burn meat, it smells like meat burning. I don't think that there was one single report or complaint about him burning. Not one. When this case started, I had been a detective for approximately 2 years, maybe 3. So I was a pretty fresh detective. The first girl was Sabrina Payne. She was found a year before in a cornfield. Sabrina, I believe, was partially clothed. And then Barbara Williams was victim number 2. A black female dumped on the side of the road. Their bodies were found within probably 25 or 30 mile radius. The scene was obvious that it was not the location of the crime, but it was what we refer to as a dump site. They were both from the same area, had the same lifestyle. Prostitutes, black female prostitutes. Some of the investigators thought, well, that's just a drug overdose and somebody dumped the body. But I kept thinking to myself, just something ain't right here. Myself and one of the other detectives told our boss that we might have a serial killer. The boss said, don't talk like that. We don't want that. I'm sure that they were worried about overtime costs because during those times, our overtime was limited, the budgets were tight, and if it's a serial killer, it's really gonna be expensive, you know? So it was a budget issue, I'm sure. Yeah, it made me angry. I can remember distinctly saying that if these were white blondes, that we'd be busting our ass right now. I mean, I hate saying that, and I'm probably gonna catch a lot of if you put that on the show, but that's the truth. So, and I'm okay with that. I don't remember where I was. I just remember the boss calling saying, we got another one. Black female, naked. Okay, on my way. I do remember saying, you believe me now? We've got a serial killer. Every investigator, every detective has their own way of dealing with when they see a dead body. The way I dealt with seeing the dead bodies is very simple. I'm a Christian. I believe in God and go to church every Sunday. When I get to a death scene, I take a quick 10 seconds without anybody ever knowing it, and I say a prayer. Dear Lord, please let me figure out what happened. Take her soul, do what you need to do with it, but give me everything I need to find out what happened, and then I move on. Linda was working as a prostitute, and this date picked her up in an old beat-up truck and took her out on a gravel road where he assaulted her, had sex with her, refused to pay her, kicked her out, and she got dumped out on the side of the road. I got called the next day to do the investigation on what happened to Linda.
Just point it out.
I picked her up in my squad car. I drove her all over the South End, asking her, Linda, if you see the car, point it out to me. And during that time, we started laughing and joking. Linda was hilarious. She was very, very funny. She was a very, very good person that made a couple bad choices, and she was an addict. The last time I talked to Linda, telling her, you need to stop this, you're gonna get hurt, and I know, Dave, I'm going to. When I get there, the crime scene person takes me to the scene. So I walk over and I'm like, yep, that's her. That's Linda. She's laying there unclothed. I remember seeing some maggots. She had a string or shoestring that was tied in a knot around her neck. I felt like I let her down. There was no DNA found on Barbara. There was no DNA found on Sabrina. And the first DNA that we were able to collect was from Linda Neal. We initially thought, okay, as soon as we get the match, we got our guy. But if DNA doesn't have a name, then DNA is useless. So you have to have the match. So
after seeing different murders broadcast on the news, it did kind of concern us because the profile of the women were kind of my mom's profile. Like they were all Black females that battle with drug addiction. I remember we seen it on the news. And I want to say everybody that was found, my mom knew on a personal level. So, we would tell her, like, Mom, like, you need to be careful. You need to start staying home more. And she will always tell us, like, don't worry about me. I'm good. She was like, oh, I'm not like them. In our heads, we're like, you are like them. But I guess she thought she was exempt from whatever was happening in our community. Eventually, her drug habit got too far out of control. I just began to see her spiral, like, down. First, it was basically her physical appearance, And then she would stay gone for days at a time. Like, it might be like 2 or 3 days. Like, have you heard from her? Have you heard from her? I do remember one time her coming to us saying that as she was ready to clean herself up, and she allowed us to take her to a drug rehab. We took her, we dropped her off at the door. About an hour later, we got a call saying she checked herself out. So it was to the point where we knew we could only do so much. And when she left that facility, we kind of knew that this is gonna be a battle. From that day forward, it was a battle.
Well, when me and Laura, we first started doing drugs, crack cocaine, I believe I tried it before Laura did, and we both liked it, there's no doubt. And it was just pretty much a weekend thing. Within about 4 year span, I'd say it almost became a daily use of the drugs. So I constantly fought it. I mean, I don't think I ever let it totally win, in other words. But I was worried about Laura. It was pretty late, about, I don't know, 11:30, midnight, something like that, and some woman knocked on the door and asked for Laura. I said, well, what do you want? She goes, I want to talk to her. There was a car out there with the car running and the lights on. I didn't know who was in the car. Laura went to the door to talk to this woman, and about, I don't know, 5 minutes went by. And Laura says, I'm going to take off with them for a little bit. I'll be back. I said, it's late. Why don't you stay here? I said, we're having a good time. What are you going to go somewhere? Well, I got to go do something for them, and I'll be right back. When Laura walked out that door, that was probably the last night of her life. I think about half an hour went by, and maybe about 45 minutes went by. That was kind of where I started getting concerned. So I'd go out and I start looking for the woman that knocked on my door. I happened to know where she lived, so I went to her house and knocked on her door. I said, where's Laura at? Oh, she ain't here. I said, where'd she go? Where is she? Oh, she took off with him. And I said, well, who is he? It was Larry. I didn't even know the guy. I don't know what to tell you, and I think she shut the window. I probably looked till 2:30, 3 in the morning. I had this feeling. I couldn't get it out of me. So I couldn't give up on the search. I went home, got some sleep. Then I searched again the next day, going to different houses where I know she might be at. And nobody's seen her. Nobody. And I guess after a couple days, maybe 2 days tops, I went to her mother's house and I said, we gotta file missing persons or something. This is not like Laura. And it was the most awful feeling that you can have. It's like, did she run away? Did she just leave town?
The very last day, the very last day I saw my mom, lie. She had come into the store where I work. And even though growing up, we knew my mom loved us, it was hardly ever said. You would feel it, but as far as hearing it, you never heard it. And this day, after she purchased her stuff and, we said our goodbyes, my mom was going out the door and she doubled back. And she was like, Mia, I love you. It shocked me, first of all, because she never said that. And of course, my natural reaction was, Mom, I love you too. So, and she walked out the door. And those were the last words we said to each other.
When the task force was formed, there were just a bunch of detectives, a few crime scene guys, a couple supervisors. And what would happen is every day we would be given tips to go investigate. And like me and my partner at the time, we would try to get the best tips because we wanted to be the one that caught the guy. We had, I think, 11 or 1,200 tips. And they just kept coming. And it would be everything from, my mailman's really creepy. The next tip would be, I think you should look into this guy because I know he sees prostitutes all the time. Everybody on that task force worked 12 to 16-hour days. We're basically looking for a needle in a haystack. I remember specifically saying, how in the hell did that happen? We were down there. We were everywhere. How did this happen? How? We had several detectives in the area where the girls were being picked up. We were watching the prostitutes. If a prostitute got picked up, we were getting license plates, we were following them, we were watching them, we were doing everything with the manpower and everything that we had to stop it from happening again, and it literally happened right under our noses. So the feeling after getting that call was like a punch in the gut, because you're doing everything you possibly can and you think you're taking steps towards solving it, and all of a sudden, kapow, you take 2 steps back. Brenda was found on Taggart Road, Peoria County, out near Farmington, completely naked, except for I think she had 1 sock on, laying face down on a muddy gravel road. With Brenda, I do remember that the scene really gave us nothing. About all we got from the scene was some inconsistent tire tracks that we couldn't really pinpoint, and a victim, and that was it. So yeah, it's very frustrating. It's like, so what's this give us? Nothing. Nothing. It gives us nothing. Every time there's a body, the pressure builds. We needed him to make a mistake so that we could catch him. What are we missing? We're missing something. We're missing something. What is it? What is it? That's what detectives do. They get everything they can. They talk about it. They debate about it. They argue about it. They agree about it. But the bottom line is always, what are we missing? Because once you find what you're missing, you've got it. It's done.
Three days after last seeing my mom alive, I get a call from my uncle And he's panicking on the phone. And he kept saying, Mia, Brenda's dead, Brenda's dead. At the time, it didn't even register like what he had said. All I can remember is dropping the phone. I remember getting there and all these detectives and police there, and all I can remember asking them is, how do you know it's her? Like, you're telling me this, what information do you have that you know it's her? And they had told me they had already identified her by fingerprints. So they knew it was her. So once I got that confirmation, all I could think about is my sisters. Like, how would they start gonna survive without their mom? Like, who wants to break this news to anyone? At times, I wish I was the last one to get the news instead of the first one. One of the hardest things I ever had to do.
One of the other detectives looked into the tip from Vicky, and that was the very first time that I'd heard the name Bright. And I distinctly remember the detective saying, we need to look into it. So me and my partner, we went to his house. The house Larry lived in, I think, was like a single stall garage that had been converted to an apartment, which was directly behind his mom's house. He had a koi pond and some beautiful flower gardens that he'd planted between his house and where his mom lived. It was well kept. Larry was easy to talk to. He wasn't very intelligent, but he seemed like a decent guy. I mean, he just seemed like a regular blue-collar Midwest person. He bragged to me about the koi pond he built for his mom. He bragged to me about the flower beds he did for his mom. I mean, everything revolved around his mom. I knew that we had DNA from one of the victims, so I asked Larry for a sample of his DNA for comparison purposes. Larry declined, but during the interview, we allowed Larry to smoke cigarettes, and it was a routine for me to take a cigarette butt if I needed it for DNA. After the interview was completed, Larry had eaten all the cigarette butts so that he wouldn't leave his DNA behind. As soon as I realized that he'd eaten the cigarette butts, I was like, okay, this is him. This has got to be him. Why else would you do that? I mean, I don't know anybody who eats cigarette butts, do you? I'm not sure how we got the DNA exactly. We might have gotten it from the plastic water bottle that was in the room when he ate the cigarette butts. He ate the cigarette butts and forgot about the water bottle. I'm not exactly sure how they got it. But we got DNA back that came from Linda Neal, and it would match Larry. That immediately gave us enough to get a search warrant for his entire property. Right outside his door, between his house and the softball field, there was a burn pit. I remember one of the crime scene guys telling me that it stunk, that there was a smell. We found the bones in the burn pit in the backyard that turned out to be human bones. Those little bone pieces were about the size of a quarter. That was it. They were little bitty pieces of bone. And at that point, we arrest him. He had, by that time, obtained an attorney. So we had to come up with a plan to get Larry to start talking without us asking him to start talking. And I was like, it's got to be his mom. As soon as he finds out that we're going to dig up his mom's flower beds that he planted, he's not going to like that. So, I mean, that's what direction we went. I said, Larry, we're going to dig up the flower beds. We're going to dig up the pond. We're going to dig up all the landscaping. And Larry's response was, you don't have to do that. I'll tell you. Tell what? What do you mean you'll tell me? I'll tell you everything. Okay, everybody stop. Let's go to an interview room.
What's up? I did it. How many of you did you do? Only 8. Hey, Larry. Hang in there, bud. Okay? Hang in there. How did they die? Did you strangle them, or what happened? Yeah. All of them were strangled? What did you use to strangle them with? My hands. Your hand? Well, what about the one we found with the shoestring around your neck? I don't know, I've been watching court TV and I was trying to make it look different than... That was pretty smart. No one, here I am. I burned the bodies. How many missing girls are we talking about? 4. 4 girls? Okay. Get me lower.
We'd kill him inside of his house. And after he got done killing them, he would clean them with bleach. And then he would go out in his backyard and he would build a fire. He'd let it get really, really hot, and then he would lay the body on top of the wood, the hot coals. And as the fire was burning, Larry would take like a spade shovel and he'd chop the bodies up little by little as it was burning. And then after that, he would shovel the pieces into a bucket and then go dump them in various areas around town. There's Brenda, Laura, Linda, Sabrina, Barbara, Tamara, Shirley, and Shakanda. I asked him why, and he just said he don't know. Larry is one of the deepest levels of evil. I mean, there's no way to comprehend how evil you have to be to do what he did.
Okay, I'm recording.
Do it.
Hey, Matt, can you maybe point to the bone fragments that you got, the big one?
This appears to be one here.
Okay.
Appears we've got one there. There's
maybe-
a fragment there.
Maybe out of that bucket, we're not sure.
Yeah, well, one up here. Oh, yeah.
The night of her murder, it rained. And because of the rain that night, he felt he couldn't burn her body because the rain will put the fire out. So he decided to load her dead, naked body in his car. He drove around and he threw her body on the side of a road. To me, being that some of the other victims were found like months later, some of them was chopped up and burned. I'm thankful that he did my mom, how he did her. We was able to have an open casket funeral for her. Like, seeing her body, it doesn't do much, but it brings some kind of closure.
Hear what he did to her. There's no body. She was chopped up and burned. Chopped and burned. That was one of the most devastating ever in my life. I never felt rage more powerful than that I had thoughts of what I could do to him, or I had thoughts, why couldn't I have been there, busting into the door or wherever they were and saved her? That's the hard part. I let her leave with a serial killer that I had no idea that was out there. But when I had to actually tell the kids, that's when I think the reality hit me the hardest. It's just that you guys believe in angels. And I could tell my older ones, they could tell what I was going to say. I could see it in their face. I could see them starting to break down before I told them. And I just remember them all going, yeah, Dad, we believe in angels. And that's when it cast, well, now your mother's an angel. Your mother's got wings now. She's an angel. But I remember how hard that was when I could see their faces and I could tell they could tell what I was about to tell them. That is not right, man. That is not right. It just ain't right. And it's all because of a bad guy. A bad guy got rid of my soulmate.
Do you remember a man named Detective Dave Hoyle?
I could never forget that man's name. I do remember. He was one that told us if we ever needed anything, if we ever wanted to know anything, that he would be honest to us and give us the most information he could. And when I say he is a man of his word, he is a man of his word. And I don't think he know how much he means to me and my sisters.
Brenda's daughters very clearly remember that you cared.
Yeah, it is nice to be able to help those people. It is hard when you try to help and you just don't get it done in time. I mean, you can't act like you care. People will see through that in a second, and it's like you have to care.
I'm content that I don't have to worry about my mom. we know where she is. Like, it's not a worry, like, is she gonna come home and something gonna happen to her? I just hate the way that it happened, the way she will be remembered to most that didn't know her. She's categorized as a drug user and a prostitute. Just because the other women had a pattern of prostituting, you can't label all these women the same. They all have different lives, different reasons for doing what they did. And I feel like that hurts more. Like, if you didn't know her and you Googled her name, all you're gonna see is Larry Bright. Like, she didn't live for him. She didn't die because she had cocaine in her system. She died because a monster got his hands on her and took her life, not because she did drugs. As long as I can, I will always try to speak the good about my mom. Before him, she was a good person and she touched a lot of people. And even after him, she will still touch a lot of people.
It began on a quiet summer night in 1990 in a small Illinois town where everyone knew everyone else, and the loudest sound after dark was the hum of cicadas in the trees. But that night the silence broke with a single, bone-freezing scream, a woman's voice, short, sharp, desperate. Then, nothing, just the endless murmur of the wind sweeping through the cornfields. By morning, a young woman named Laura McKinney, 26 years old, would be found dead at the edge of Miller's Creek. Her body half submerged, her hands pale and stiff, as if frozen in the moment she tried to fight back. The discovery came from a fisherman just after sunrise. He said the water looked strange that morning, still thick, too quiet. When he walked closer, he saw her hair floating like weeds, her face turned upward to the sky. The scream from the night before now had a name, a face, and a story that no one could yet understand. Laura was the kind of person people called the heart of the town. She worked at the local library, organized church bake sales, and visited her aging mother every weekend. She had no enemies, no scandals, no reason for anyone to hurt her. So when word spread that she had been murdered, shock hit the town like a thunderclap. Doors that were once left unlocked stayed bolted. Neighbors started eyeing each other with suspicion. Something had broken the peace, and no one knew who. The initial investigation moved fast. Detectives from the county sheriff's office combed the creek bank for evidence, marking footprints in the mud, collecting fibers, anything that might tell them who had been there. But the scene was messy. The water had washed away most traces. All they had were fragments, a broken bracelet, a few dark hairs caught in her fingers, and a single tire track leading back toward the highway. Autopsy results added more questions than answers. Cause of death, blunt force trauma to the head. Time of death, sometime between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m., no signs of sexual assault, no drugs or alcohol in her system. It looked personal, rage-driven. But by who? Detectives started with the people closest to her, friends, co-workers, family. Her mother, Evelyn, could barely speak through the tears. Her brother, Michael McKinney, calm and composed, told police that Laura had called him earlier that night, just a brief conversation, nothing unusual. He said he'd been home all evening fixing his truck, alone. At first, no one questioned him. Michael was the golden boy of the family, the kind of man neighbors trusted to fix their fences and help at church. He was quiet, polite, steady. A Vietnam vet who'd come back changed, they said, but still good at heart. He told the sheriff he'd do anything to help, and they believed him. But behind closed doors, whispers began. People said the McKinneys weren't as perfect as they looked. There had been arguments, loud ones, about money, about Laura planning to sell the family home after their father's death. Michael wanted to keep it. Laura didn't. Police noted it, but without evidence, it was nothing more than small-town talk. Weeks passed, leads dried up. The case went cold. Year after year, Laura's photo stayed pinned to the corkboard in the sheriff's office, a black and white portrait, smiling under a strip of yellowed tape. Every Christmas, her mother lit a candle in the window, hoping for an answer. Every anniversary, the local paper ran the same headline, "Who Killed Laura McKinney?" Detectives retired, files gathered dust, DNA technology was still young, too primitive to help. And so time did what it always does, it buried the noise. But not everyone forgot. In 2018, nearly 3 decades later, a new generation of detectives reopened the box marked McKinney Laura Homicide. Inside 243 pages of reports, faded photographs, and a single brown envelope labeled Unprocessed Evidence. Inside that envelope, the broken bracelet, the hair strands, and a partial fingerprint lifted from the metal clasp. Technology had changed. What was once useless could now talk. Detective Sarah Collins, newly promoted to cold case, fed the samples into the state database. She didn't expect much. Most cold cases end with silence. But 2 weeks later, the screen blinked partial DNA match found. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't enough for an arrest. But it was something. The match pointed to a male relative, someone connected to the victim by blood. At first, Sarah thought it might belong to Laura's late father, but the system ruled him out. Then came the realization that made her stomach turn. The only living male relative in the database link was Michael McKinney. Still, it could be contamination, coincidence, even a lab error. Sarah knew better than to jump. She needed more, something that placed him at the scene, something that couldn't be explained away by family DNA overlap. She started digging through Michael's past. Records showed that after Laura's death, he'd moved out of town, married briefly, then divorced. His ex-wife had filed a restraining order in 1994. In the statement, she'd written, "He has a temper. He hides it well until he explodes." No one had ever connected it to Laura. Sarah reached out to the ex-wife now living in Iowa. The woman hesitated, then said quietly, "He used to talk about her, his sister. Said she ruined everything. I didn't know what he meant, but he'd get this look. Like he was somewhere else." It wasn't proof, but it was fuel, enough to keep the investigation alive. The next step was re-examining the physical evidence. Forensic techs retested the hairs found in Laura's hand. One strand came back with a full mitochondrial DNA sequence, male, same maternal line, but not a match to Laura herself. That narrowed it to her brother. Sarah didn't tell the press. She didn't tell the family. Not yet. She wanted one final confirmation, a fingerprint match. That old partial print from the bracelet run through the new national system. Days turned into weeks. Then the call came. "Detective Collins, we have a hit." It was faint, degraded partial, but still conclusive enough to identify one person. The print belonged to Michael McKinney. He was 70 now, living alone on the outskirts of Springfield. Neighbors said he was quiet, polite, always feeding stray cats. No one imagined he'd been hiding a ghost for 33 years. Sarah drove out there one cold morning in February 2023. Snow dusted the fields where the corn once stood. She knocked on his door. He opened it, slowly looked at her badge, then sighed. "I was wondering when someone would come," he said. Those words hung in the air, heavy, resigned, almost relieved. Inside the house was clean but sparse. Old family photos lined the walls, Laura smiling at everyone. Sarah told him they had evidence that she wanted to hear his side before the world did. He sat in silence for a long time, staring at the floor. Then he said something that would haunt her long after the case closed. "She wasn't supposed to die. I just wanted her to listen." He confessed quietly, almost gently. Said they'd argued that night about selling the house, about family pride, about a secret their father had left behind in his will. Laura had threatened to go to the police about something Michael had done years earlier, something that would ruin him. He didn't say what, only that it was worse than stealing. He followed her when she left the house. They fought near the creek. She slipped, hit her head on a rock. He panicked, tried to make it look like an accident, threw the bracelet into the water, didn't realize he'd left his fingerprint behind. When he finished talking, he didn't ask for a lawyer, didn't resist, just stared out the window, watching the snowfall. "She used to love the first snow," he whispered. The cold case that haunted Illinois for more than 3 decades had finally cracked open, but instead of relief, what followed was silence. The kind of silence that comes after a storm when everyone realizes the destruction isn't over, it's just invisible. The town that once mourned Laura now had to face the truth. The killer had been among them all along. Her mother was gone by then, buried years before the confession. She never knew, but people said maybe that was for the best. Some truths, after all, are heavier than the lies that hide them. And so, in the files of the Illinois State Police, a red stamp appeared across the folder that had once gathered dust, case closed. But for those who remembered that scream echoing through the night in 1990, the closure brought no peace, only a deeper question that no confession could answer. What kind of love turns into that kind of silence? After the confession, word spread through the town like wildfire, the kind that moves without sound, creeping through phone lines, grocery store whispers, and church pews. The name Michael McKinney, once said with respect, now hung in the air like a curse. People struggled to believe it. The same man who fixed their tractors, who sat quietly in the back row at Sunday service, had carried a secret darker than anyone imagined. But behind the disbelief was something deeper guilt. Because for 33 years, the town had lived next to a killer, waved to him every morning, and never once suspected. The sheriff held a press conference on a gray February afternoon. Cameras flickered. Snow fell, slow and silent. Behind the podium, Detective Sarah Collins read from her notes, her voice steady but strained. The Illinois State Police Cold Case Unit has confirmed the arrest of 70-year-old Michael McKinney for the 1990 homicide of his sister, Laura McKinney. Reporters scribbled, microphones hissed. Someone asked, was this a confession or coercion? Sarah looked up, eyes sharp. It was a confession, she said, unprompted. For a case buried by time, the story hit the media like a shockwave. Brother confesses. After 33 years, screamed one headline. Illinois cold case solved through DNA breakthrough, wrote another. But none of them captured the undercurrent of unease that settled over the town, the quiet realization that justice, when it comes too late, feels hollow. Michael was booked into county jail without incident. Mugshot cameras captured a face worn by age but not regret. His eyes were flat, expressionless, as though the act of confessing had drained him completely. When asked by investigators why he stayed silent for so long, he said only, "No one asked the right question." The statement struck Sarah harder than she expected, because in a way, he was right. Over the years, countless detectives had flipped through the same file, read the same reports, followed the same dead ends, and yet no one had seen the truth hiding in plain sight, not in the evidence, but in the family. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She sat at her desk long after midnight, the file open again in front of her. Laura's face looked back at her. The same soft smile frozen in that old library photo. Next to it, a black and white image of Michael from his army days. The resemblance was uncanny. The same eyes, same mouth, the same air of quiet control. A thought crossed her mind. Maybe the reason the case stayed cold wasn't because no one cared, but because no one dared to suspect him. The brother, the loyal son, the one everyone trusted. She flipped through the original witness statements. There it was, a small note in pencil buried in the margins. Neighbor heard argument around 11:30 p.m., male voice shouting, "You'll regret this." The detail had been dismissed. Back then, detectives assumed it was a couple fighting nearby. But in the context of Michael's confession, it aligned perfectly. The following week, prosecutors began building the case. They didn't need a trial to prove guilt. The confession was enough. But they wanted the record clear, complete, documented for history. Sarah spent hours cross-referencing old files, re-interviewing witnesses, reconstructing a timeline that had once been fog. In the process, she found something that gnawed at her. A letter undated, folded inside the original evidence folder. The handwriting was neat, feminine, faded with age. It began, "If anything happens to me, look at Michael. He's been angry lately talking about the house about Dad. I think he's hiding something." It was signed Laura. No one knew. The letter existed. It had never been logged into evidence. The envelope was unmarked, sealed inside a stack of paperwork from the coroner's office. Maybe a clerk overlooked it. Maybe someone deliberately buried it. Either way, it was a message from the dead, and it changed everything. Sarah sat frozen, the letter trembling in her hands. It wasn't just a confession now. It was a warning one that had gone unheard for 33 years. She scanned the writing again. He's hiding something. The words looped in her head like a chant. What had Michael been hiding? What secret had driven him to silence his sister that night? Back at the precinct, Sarah reopened the archived box labeled Estate and Financials. Inside, she found the McKinney family will a document signed in 1989, months before Laura's death. It revealed something curious. Their father's land wasn't as simple as everyone believed. Beneath the cornfields lay rights to a long-defunct mining property. Worth nothing in 1990, worth millions now. Laura had wanted to sell. Michael refused. But maybe it wasn't just about money. Sarah ordered a search of property records. That's when the deeper story surfaced. After Laura's death, Michael quietly transferred part of the estate into a shell company, one that didn't exist until weeks after the murder. Over the years, he'd sold parcels bit by bit, earning small fortunes no one questioned. When detectives confronted him with the documents, he didn't deny it. He just said, "It was my father's land. Laura wanted to destroy everything he built." The confession began to look less like an accident and more like intent. Still, something didn't fit. The way he spoke about his sister soft detached didn't sound like hate. It sounded like obsession. Sarah dug deeper into their past, reaching out to Laura's old colleagues at the library, her childhood friends, anyone who might have noticed the cracks. One friend, Nancy Hill, now in her 60s, remembered something odd. "Laura told me Michael was getting too close," she said. Not in a brotherly way. She said she was scared. The statement sent chills down Sarah's spine. The implications were darker than anyone had imagined. The murder perhaps wasn't just about property, it was about control possession, something twisted into obsession. Sarah requested access to Michael's old psychiatric evaluations from his time in the VA hospital after Vietnam. The records were heavily redacted, but one line stood out. Displays dissociative tendencies when confronted with authority. Exhibits fixation on family and legacy. The pieces were starting to connect. Michael's world revolved around control of his land, his name, and his sister. When Laura threatened that control, he snapped. But why confess now after 33 years? Why open the wound again? Sarah asked him that during a second interview, the tape recorder humming quietly between them. He looked older now, frailer hands trembling slightly as he folded and unfolded a paper napkin. "I kept seeing her," he said, "in dreams, standing by the creek. Not angry, just waiting. I thought if I told the truth, maybe she'd stop." His eyes flickered wet, but distant. "She hasn't." The words lingered in the air, heavy as smoke. After his confession was entered into record, Michael was charged with second-degree murder. Because of his age and health, he was held in a medical facility pending trial. The prosecutor pushed for full conviction, but many in the community were divided. Some believed justice was overdue. Others said it was cruel to punish an old man for sins long past. But the truth was, time doesn't wash away blood, it just hides it under new layers of dust. Sarah stood at the creek one evening, watching the water flow where Laura had taken her last breath. The same current, the same stillness, only now colder. The trees whispered in the wind as if carrying the ghost of that scream from 1990. She thought about all the cases still sitting in boxes, names, faces, unfinished stories. How many of them hid their truth behind the same mask of normalcy? The sun dipped below the horizon, bleeding red across the water. Sarah whispered almost to herself, "You're free now, Laura." But deep down she knew that freedom didn't erase the shadow that lingered. Because every solved case leaves another question in its wake, not about guilt, but about silence. About how a community, a family, a brother could live with a secret like that for decades without it breaking them. Back at her desk, she filed the last of the reports. The case was officially closed. But when she shut off the light and turned to leave, she noticed something strange. The old letter, Laura's warning, had been moved. Not by much, just a few inches closer to the edge of the desk. Sarah froze. The air felt colder. Outside, snow began to fall again, thick and slow, covering the footprints that led to the station door. The snow kept falling that night, blanketing the town like a shroud. In the glow of the streetlights, everything looked motionless, silent, suffocating, untouched. But under that stillness, something had shifted. The town had its closure, yes, but not its peace. You could feel it in the air, in the way people spoke Michael's name like it carried a curse. At the county detention facility, Michael McKinney sat alone in a gray room with no windows, hands folded neatly on the table. He looked calm, almost content. When the guard asked if he needed anything, he just smiled faintly. "I've waited long enough," he said. "I can wait a bit more." But beneath that calm exterior, something dark was unraveling. The medical staff noted his erratic sleep patterns, his long silences, his tendency to talk to someone who wasn't there. In his cell, he whispered into the corner, "It's almost over, Laura." They thought it was dementia, maybe guilt, maybe both. But there was something else, a sense that he wasn't finished talking. Detective Sarah Collins couldn't shake the feeling either. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that letter. "If anything happens to me, look at Michael." The words weren't just a warning, they were a map. But to what? She started retracing Laura's final days before her death. The original reports said she left work at 8:45 p.m., stopped at a convenience store, then drove home. But now, with access to digital archives, Sarah found something no one had seen before: a single security camera still framed from that store. The image was grainy, but behind Laura, parked in the corner of the lot, was a dark pickup truck, same make, same model as Michael's old Ford. It wasn't proof, but it was enough to reopen the questions no one wanted to ask. What if the murder wasn't a single moment of rage? What if it was planned? Sarah went to see Michael again. This time he didn't greet her with resignation. He greeted her with curiosity. "You're not here for the confession," he said quietly. "You're here for what comes after." She didn't answer. She just placed the still image on the table between them. His eyes flicked down, lingered for half a second, then back up. "You knew she'd stop there that night, didn't you?" she asked. He leaned back, his voice flat. "She stopped there every Friday. She liked the lemon pies they sold. You don't forget habits." His tone was almost admiring. Sarah felt the air grow heavier. "She wrote a letter before she died," Sarah said. "She said you were hiding something. What was it?" He smiled again, small, chilling. "You wouldn't understand. It wasn't about money. It was about keeping what's mine." Sarah's pen hovered over the page. "Your sister?" He didn't answer, just stared past her, his eyes distant, the muscles in his jaw tightening. When she left that night, he whispered, she didn't even say goodbye. There was no remorse in his voice, just disappointment. When she left the facility, the sky had turned to steel. Wind whipped through the empty parking lot, scattering dry leaves across the asphalt. She felt sick, because what she heard in his voice wasn't insanity, it was devotion, twisted and cold. Back at headquarters, Sarah pulled the old case files one last time. She focused on the weeks leading up to the murder phone records bank withdrawals, library sign-ins. One detail caught her eye, a check Laura had written the day before she died. Made out to a name Sarah didn't recognize, C. Howell, for $500. The memo line read, "Consultation." The original detectives hadn't followed up, but Sarah did. She tracked the name through public archives and found a listing: Charles Howell, private investigator, retired. He'd worked out of Peoria in the late 80s and early 90s. Still alive now in a nursing home. When she called, the nurse said he barely spoke anymore. But when she mentioned Laura McKinney, the line went quiet. Then a raspy voice came through. "You found me," he said. 2 days later, she drove to meet him. Howell was frail, his hands trembling as he reached for a cup of water. His eyes, though, were sharp. "Laura hired me," he said, voice dry. "She thought her brother was watching her, said he was following her car. I told her to go to the police, but she was scared it'd make him worse." Sarah's heart raced. "Did she tell you why?" Howell nodded slowly. She found something. Papers, a file their father kept locked in his study. She thought Michael forged signatures, land transfers, bonds, something about a trust fund. She wanted proof before she confronted him. Sarah leaned in. "What happened to the file?" He sighed. "She brought it to me. Asked me to hold on to it until she called. But she never called. After the murder, I was afraid. Sheriff told me it was a robbery gone wrong, said the case was handled. I burned it." Sarah's stomach dropped. "You destroyed the evidence." He looked down, ashamed. "I thought it would keep me safe. When Sarah left the nursing home, she sat in her car for a long time, the wind whistling through the bare trees. That file, whatever was in it, might have been the reason Laura died, and even in death, it was gone. But as she turned to key, her phone buzzed. A message from the lab. You need to see this. At the evidence unit, the forensic analyst handed her a photo. It was the bracelet, the one Laura had been wearing the night she died. Under UV light, new markings appeared on the inside of the metal clasp, barely visible, before now glowing faintly. Letters scratched into the surface. LM 9/12. Laura's initials. But the date didn't match the night she died. It was 4 days before. Sarah's pulse quickened. Why would she carve the date? The analyst shrugged. Could have been sentimental, or a message. That night, Sarah drove back to Miller's Creek, flashlight in hand, her boots crunching over the frozen earth. The creek murmured softly, dark and endless. She stopped near the spot where the body was found. Snow dusted the rocks, and the cold bit into her lungs. She crouched by the water and stared at her reflection. The wind whispered through the trees, and for a moment, she thought she heard something. A faint voice, a breath, a sigh. Then she saw it, a small rusted chain caught between two stones barely visible under the ice. She reached in, pulled it free. A locket. Inside, a faded photo of Laura as a child standing beside a younger Michael. Behind it, another engraving he promised. The words cut through her like a blade. He promised what? The next morning, she went back to the facility. Michael was in the infirmary, now attached to an IV, his skin pale and translucent. He looked up when she entered. You went back, he said softly. You made her a promise? Sarah said. What was it? He smiled weakly. We swore we'd never tell, not even after Dad died. But she broke her word. What word? Sarah pressed. Michael's eyes unfocused, drifting somewhere far away. There was another. Not just us. He made her keep it. Said it would destroy the family. Sarah's heartbeat quickened. Who, Michael? Who was the other? He tried to speak, but his breathing hitched. The monitor beeped wildly. Doctors rushed in. Sarah stepped back as the room flooded with nurses. Within minutes, the line on the heart monitor flattened. Michael McKinney was dead. The man who had confessed to killing his sister took his final secret with him. But as Sarah stood there, numb, she noticed something the nurses hadn't. Clutched in his left hand was a folded piece of paper, damp with sweat. She waited until the chaos settled, then carefully pried it open. Only 2 words were written shaky and fading. Not alone. The hospital hallway was silent after Michael McKinney's death, but it wasn't the kind of silence that settles. It was the kind that hums alive, restless. Detective Sarah Collins stood outside the infirmary door, staring at the paper in her hand. 2 words. Not alone. They looked like the final flicker of a dying conscience, but what if they were something more? A clue. A name. A warning. She turned the words over in her mind as the snow fell heavier outside, coating the parking lot like ash. Inside, the overhead lights buzzed faintly, the kind of sterile hum that makes time feel slower. Michael was gone, but his shadow still stretched long over everything he touched. When Sarah returned to her office, the case file sat waiting on her desk, the same folder that now carried a closed stamp in red. It stared back at her accusingly. The department had moved on. The press had moved on. But she couldn't. There were still too many missing pieces. She read his last note again, her mind racing. Not alone. If Michael wasn't alone that night, if someone helped him, or watched, or knew, then Laura's death wasn't just a crime of passion. It was a conspiracy buried beneath 3 decades of silence. She started with what she knew. Michael and Laura had argued about the property, the inheritance, the land. But the deeper she went into the records, the stranger it became. In 1989, months before the murder, the McKinney land had been appraised at almost nothing. But within a year after Laura's death, ownership quietly changed hands twice, first to Michael, then to an entity called Harrison Development Group. Sarah searched the archives. Harrison Development wasn't some faceless corporation. It was a front-a-shell company founded by Sheriff Paul Harrison, the very man who had led the original 1990 investigation. Her breath caught. The man who declared the case solved as an accident all those years ago, the man who told Howell, the private investigator, to burn his files, had been profiting from the McKinney land. Suddenly, everything made sense and nothing made sense at all. Sarah sat in the dark, the glow of her monitor washing her face in cold light. She clicked through the property deeds, the transfers, the timestamps. The signatures were neat, too neat. All notarized by the same clerk. All within 6 months after Laura's death. She leaned back, whispering to herself, he wasn't alone. The next morning, she drove to the retirement home where Harrison lived now, 82 years old, nearly blind, still sharp enough to remember every name in the county. When she introduced herself, his smile was courteous but tight. I know who you are, he'd said, the cold case detective. I'm here about Michael McKinney, she said. His smile faltered. That case is closed, detective. Then why does your signature appear on the deeds to his land? The silence that followed was long, heavy, dangerous. He adjusted his glasses, stared at her like he was calculating the cost of truth. Finally, he said, You've been digging in things best left buried. Laura McKinney was murdered, Sarah replied. You buried the wrong thing. He chuckled dryly. You think that girl was innocent, you don't know what she found. Sarah leaned in. Then tell me. He sighed. The McKinney land sits on an old pipeline decommissioned in '74. But it wasn't empty. There was illegal dumping there, waste from the refinery. The father took hush money to keep quiet. Laura wanted to go public. She didn't understand that would have ruined everyone. Her father, her brother, half the town worked at that plant. She wanted to burn it all down for her ideals. Sarah's voice hardened. So you helped Michael silence her. Harrison didn't answer. He just stared out the window at the falling snow. Sometimes the truth kills more people than a lie, he murmured. She stood heart-pounding. You're not confessing to wisdom, Sheriff. You're confessing to murder. But when she reached for her recorder, he looked back at her with something between pity and warning. You think they'll let you finish this. That sentence stuck with her long after she left the facility. She drove home through the whiteout headlights, cutting through the storm. The radio crackled with static. For a moment, she thought she saw a figure on the side of the road, a woman, pale still standing by the trees. She blinked, and the figure was gone. Back at her apartment, she poured a glass of water, but her hands were shaking too hard to drink. She laid Michael's note on the table, beside her, not alone. And beside it, the copy of the property transfer with Harrison's name. The connection was undeniable, but proof was fragile. She needed something tangible, something physical, that tied them together. The next morning, she returned to the evidence room. She asked for the original tape of Michael's confession, the one recorded the day he admitted everything. The technician hesitated. We don't keep analog anymore, he said. Most old tapes get digitized, then destroyed. But when he searched the catalog, one tape was missing from the records. The entry for McKinney Michael interview #2 was marked unavailable. Sarah froze. Who signed it out? He checked the log. The signature was familiar, looping heavy ink. P. Harrison. Her pulse raced. The retired sheriff had taken the tape before he left office 20 years ago. By evening, she was back at the retirement home, the storm now a full blizzard. The receptionist told her Harrison was in his room resting. She walked down the dim hallway, the carpet swallowing her footsteps. His door was slightly ajar. She pushed it open. The room was dark, except for the glow of a small television. Harrison sat in his chair, head-tilted, eyes open, but glassy. On the nightstand beside him lay a small cassette tape half-wrapped in tissue. He was dead. Sarah stepped closer, her breath fogging in the cold air. The TV played an old news clip, her own voice from the press conference months earlier. Michael McKinney has confessed to the murder of his sister, Laura McKinney. The irony was chilling. She picked up the tape. Scrawled on the label in faded ink were 3 words, not the end. The room suddenly felt colder. The curtain moved slightly, though the window was closed. Sarah left quickly, the tape clutched tight in her hand. Back at the station, she found an old cassette player in evidence storage. She plugged it in, hit play. Static. Then a voice Michael's faint and broken. She said she'd tell. I couldn't let her. But they said they'd help. They promised no one would know. They took her. I didn't mean for them to. The tape cut off in a burst of static. Sarah rewound it, listening again. They took her. It wasn't him who finished it. It wasn't just Michael that night. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight. The snow outside had stopped. The streets were silent, blank, waiting. She played the tape again, pressing her ear closer. In the background, barely audible, was another sound, a second voice. deep calm, unmistakably familiar. "It's done. Leave the rest to us." Sarah froze. She knew that voice. It wasn't Michael. It wasn't Harrison. It was someone still alive. Someone inside the department. She stopped the tape, staring at the spinning reels, slowing to silence. And in that moment, she realized the case was never really closed. It had only changed hands. The tape stopped spinning, but the silence it left behind was deafening. Detective Sarah Collins sat frozen in the glow of her desk lamp, the cassette still humming faintly inside the player. The static seemed to breathe a low hiss that filled the empty room like the sound of something alive. Her pulse was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "It's done. Leave the rest to us." The voice was unmistakable, calm, controlled, familiar in a way that made her stomach twist. She rewound the tape again, pressed play, and listened closely this time. Every breath, every pause, the cadence of speech, the tone. She'd heard it before, not on the tape, but in person. Captain Richard Hale, her direct superior. He'd been the one who encouraged her to reopen the McKinney case in the first place, the one who pushed her to keep digging, the one who congratulated her when Michael confessed. And now his voice was on the tape, whispering from 1990, like a ghost, refusing to stay buried. Sarah leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. Hale had joined the department in the late 80s, a young deputy under Sheriff Harrison. He'd been at the original crime scene, he'd written one of the first reports, and he'd stayed close to the case for decades, watching every new detective fail to solve it. Until her. She stared at the tape, trying to make sense of it. If Hale was there that night, if they took Laura as Michael said, then the confession was only half the truth. Maybe Michael hadn't killed his sister alone. Maybe he hadn't killed her at all. Sarah locked the tape in an evidence box, sealed it, and signed it into her custody. Then she turned off the lights, slipped her coat on, and walked out into the night. The city was dead quiet. Snow lay thick on the roads, and the orange streetlights painted everything in a sickly glow. She got into her car, but she didn't drive home. Instead, she parked 2 blocks away from Hale's house, a modest ranch on the edge of town. Lights on inside. Curtains half drawn. She sat there watching the engine off her breath, fogging the glass. Inside, she could see him, gray hair, still broad-shouldered, sitting at his kitchen table. He was laughing, talking to someone out of view, a woman, his wife maybe. His world looked ordinary, safe calm, but beneath it, Sarah could feel the rot. After a long moment, she drove away. She wasn't ready, not yet. She needed something more solid than a voice on a tape. The next morning, she requested the original crime scene photos, all 172 of them. She spread them across the table in the cold case room, each one a frozen second from the night of July 14th, 1990. The creek, the mud, the drag marks the footprints. One photo caught her attention, a partial boot print near the waterline. The file noted it as unidentified. Sarah magnified it on the monitor. A heavy tread pattern, a deep arch, worn heel, distinctive. She ran it through the FBI's footwear database. The match came back within minutes. Blackhawk tactical boot, 1989, issue standard law enforcement gear. Her stomach dropped. In 1990, only officers in the county sheriff's office wore that model. And one of the first deputies on the scene, Richard Hale. Sarah's hand trembled as she closed the report. The threads were tightening, pulling everything toward the same dark center. Harrison, Hale, Michael. The night of the murder wasn't a moment of rage, it was a cover-up. But what exactly had they covered up? That question haunted her all day. She returned to the transcripts from Michael's confession, scanning for anything that hinted at more. Halfway through page 9, she saw it. They told me it'd look like an accident. Said she slipped. Said no one would find out what was buried there. What was buried there? Sarah stared at the words, the air in her office growing colder. She opened a new file overlaying the topographical maps of the McKinney property with recent geological surveys. In the corner of the plot, the same area near Miller's Creek, there was an old sinkhole sealed off in 1992 for environmental stabilization. She knew that term. It usually meant contamination or a cover-up. By nightfall, she was driving there. The old McKinney land had changed since the 90s. The cornfields were gone, replaced by scrub and frost-bitten weeds. But the creek was still there, still flowing through the same dark valley. She parked at the edge of the old access road, her flashlight cutting a narrow path through the cold. The ground was frozen, the air sharp enough to bite. She found the sign half buried in snow-restricted area environmental hazard. Sarah ducked under the tape. The site was silent except for the wind. The earth dipped slightly where the sinkhole had been sealed, forming a shallow crater filled with snow. She crouched, brushing her gloved hand over the dirt. It was uneven, softer in the middle. She dug, just a few inches at first, then more. Her glove hit something hard. She brushed the soil away, and a glint of rust caught her beam. A metal barrel, cracked open at the top. She peered inside. Inside the barrel were bones, human bones, smaller than an adult's. She stumbled back, her flashlight shaking in her hand. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. The wind howled through the trees, low and mournful. She called it in. Forensics arrived within the hour. By dawn, the site was crawling with investigators. The first estimates came fast. The remains belonged to a child roughly 8 to 10 years old, buried decades earlier. There was no record of a missing child connected to the McKinney property. None. Sarah felt a chill crawl up her spine. Michael had said there was another. He made her keep it. Was this what Laura found? By afternoon, lab results confirmed the bones were too degraded for immediate identification, but traces of industrial waste were found in the soil, the same kind Harrison had mentioned. The dumping, the refinery, the hush money. It all connected. Laura must have discovered the remains while investigating the land. Maybe she planned to expose it, and that's why they silenced her. Sarah returned to her office exhausted, but when she opened her email, one message caught her eye. No sender, no subject, just a single line. "You should have stayed out of this." Her pulse spiked. She checked the sender's data, encrypted, untraceable. She leaned back in her chair, the walls suddenly feeling too close. The department was compromised. If Hale was involved, if others were too, she couldn't trust anyone. She packed the tape, the letter, and her notes into a sealed folder and drove home through the freezing rain. That night, she couldn't sleep. The storm outside battered the windows. Somewhere between the wind and her own heartbeat, she heard it, faint but clear. A woman's voice, not alone. She jolted upright, breathing hard. The sound had come from her desk. The cassette player had turned itself on. The tape spun again, playing the same static, the same fragments. But this time, the faint background noise was different. A soft cry. A child's cry. Sarah felt her chest tighten. She pressed stop, pulled the plug from the wall, but the reels kept turning. The sound grew louder, then silence. The player stopped, and on the screen of her phone, a new message appeared. "You're next." The rain didn't stop that night. It drummed against the windows like an impatient hand, relentless, rhythmic. Detective Sarah Collins sat in the dark, the faint glow of her phone screen, the only light in the room. The message was still there. 2 words that didn't belong in the world of reason. "You're next." Her hands trembled. She told herself it was a prank, a sick joke, maybe a leak in the department. But deep down, she knew better. No one outside the investigation knew the details. No one else had heard the tape. Whoever sent that message wasn't watching from the outside. They were inside, close. The air in her apartment felt thick, heavy. She stood, walked to the door, checked the locks twice, 3 times. The street below was empty. Wet asphalt shining under the streetlights. Her reflection stared back from the window, pale, wide-eyed, exhausted. Behind her, something creaked. She turned sharply. Nothing. Just the low hum of the refrigerator. Sleep was impossible. So she went back to the files, her lifeline against the fear. She laid everything out on the table. The letter from Laura, the tape, the printouts, the property maps. Each piece fit together in a way that was almost too perfect, too intentional. Michael's guilt, Harrison's cover-up, Hale's voice, the buried child. But there was still a hole in the puzzle, the why. Why had Laura kept the secret? Why had she written, "He made her keep it"? The answer had to be in the McKinney estate files. She'd combed them before, but she hadn't looked at the sealed legal attachments, the ones labeled confidential, attorney correspondence. They'd been restricted when she first reopened the case, protected under old privacy laws, but now, with the confession, the warrant had been lifted. Sarah logged into the state archive system, her fingers cold on the keyboard. Dozens of scanned documents appeared, brittle pages, digitized decades too late. Then she saw it a letter dated February 3rd, 1989, addressed to Laura and Michael's father from a law firm in Chicago. This is to confirm the receipt of payment for services related to the confidential transfer and adoption of a minor. The involved parties have requested full anonymity. Her pulse quickened. An adoption. But there was no record of a third child in the McKinney family. Not in the census, not in the birth certificates. Whoever that child was, they were erased before they even existed. Sarah scrolled further. Another document appeared unsigned but typed in the same format. Subject placed in care of client's family condition undisclosed. Arrangement to remain off public record. Condition undisclosed. The bones buried near Miller's Creek weren't just victims of corporate dumping, they were family. Laura must have discovered it, the existence of another child, maybe one born with complications hidden from the public, perhaps to protect the family's reputation. Maybe the child had died accidentally or not accidentally at all. Sarah's thoughts tangled. He made her keep it. The Desailly wasn't Michael. It wasn't Harrison. It was their father. And when Laura found out, when she tried to expose everything Michael raised on silence on obedience, did what he thought he had to do. But Hale and Harrison, they took it further. They turned one family's tragedy into a cover-up to protect the town, the refinery themselves. Sarah sat back, her heart pounding. The air smelled faintly of ozone, that metallic tang before lightning. She realized the rain had stopped. The world outside had gone still. Then her phone vibrated again. One new message, no number. Just a single word. Stop! She froze. The apartment lights flickered once, twice, then went out. Total darkness. Sarah reached for her gun, her flashlight. The beam cut through the black, shaky and narrow. Every corner of the room looked different in the half-light, sharper, stranger. The shadows seemed to breathe. A soft thud came from the kitchen, then another. "Who's there?" She called out, her voice low but steady. No answer. She stepped forward, every sense screaming. The beam caught something on the floor, a wet footprint, bare, small. Another step, then another. The footprints led toward her desk. Her heart hammered as she followed the trail. There, on top of the open case file, was the cassette player. The cord was unplugged. The reels spun slowly on their own. Sarah lifted her flashlight and froze. In the reflection of the window, she saw movement behind her. A figure. She spun around, gun raised. Nothing. Just the sound of static, growing louder from the tape. The voice returned. Not Michael's, not Hale's, not anyone alive. "She kept my name." Sarah's breath caught. "Who are you?" she whispered. No reply, just static and the faint echo of a child's cry fading into silence. Then, as suddenly as it began, the lights flickered back on. The footprints were gone. The cassette had stopped. Her pulse thudded in her throat. It had to be stress. Fatigue. She'd been awake for too long. Her mind was breaking under the weight of ghosts that didn't exist. And yet, on her desk, a new document lay atop the others. One she hadn't printed. It was an old birth record, illegible in places, but one line was clear. Name Lily McKinney, born 1981, status deceased. Lily, the hidden child, the one Laura had promised to protect. Sarah felt a chill crawl up her spine. The file timestamp said it had been accessed from a restricted state database at 2:43 a.m. She looked at her computer clock, 2:43 a.m. exactly. Someone or something had sent it to her at the same moment she heard the voice. She didn't sleep the rest of the night. By morning, she was back at the precinct. The sky outside was gray, bruised, threatening snow again. She went straight to Internal Affairs, demanded to see Captain Hale. The secretary said he wasn't in. His office was locked. His car wasn't in the lot. Sarah's gut twisted. She walked back to her desk and stopped cold. Her entire workspace had been cleared. The files, the evidence, the photos all gone, even the tape. She ran to the evidence room. Empty. The clerk shook his head confused. "Your transfer order came through at 6 a.m., he said. Said all materials were to be relocated to state archives under Captain Hale's authority." Sarah's voice went cold. "Show me the order." He turned the monitor toward her. The signature glared from the screen. R. Hale. But there was a problem. The timestamp on the order was 5:12 a.m., 2 hours before sunrise. And Captain Hale had been dead since 4:30. Sarah's blood ran cold. She stumbled back, the room spinning. The clerk looked at her, puzzled. "You okay, detective?" She nodded slowly, forcing a thin smile. "Yeah," she lied. "Just tired." But as she walked away, she caught her reflection in the glass door, and for a fleeting second, just long enough to make her heart stop, she saw another face beside her own. A girl, small, pale, watching. And then she was gone. Sarah blinked hard, her breath fogging the glass. Outside, the snow had started again, soft, slow, endless. And in the wind that slipped through the door as she left, she could swear she heard it a whisper, high and faint. Don't stop. By dawn, the town was covered in white, a clean surface over decades of filth. But Detective Sarah Collins knew better than to believe in clean starts. Snow only hides what's beneath. It never erases. She parked in front of the precinct engine, running eyes fixed on the building. Inside those walls, someone had rewritten her case, stolen her evidence, and forged a dead man's signature. But she couldn't prove it. Not yet. Every digital trail she'd followed had vanished overnight, scrubbed from the system. Even the archive records had been overwritten. It was like the McKinney case had never existed. The system was eating its own memory. Sarah stepped out into the cold boots crunching on ice. Her breath came out in sharp clouds. The town was just waking up shop windows, lighting one by one, coffee steam rising from sidewalks. The world looked ordinary again, like nothing had ever happened. But she could feel it eyes on her, watching, measuring her every move. At her desk, someone had left a note under her coffee mug. No signature, no handwriting, just a torn piece of newspaper with one word circled in red. Confession. Sarah's pulse quickened. She recognized the font. It was from an old Daily Ledger article dated July 16th, 1990, 2 days after Laura's murder. She pulled the digital archives again, searching for the exact issue. There it was, a front-page story she'd seen before. Local woman found dead near Miller's Creek. But now, she looked closer. At the bottom corner of the photo, behind the cluster of deputies, a face she hadn't noticed before. Young, uniformed, watching the camera. Captain Hale. And beside him, another man. Slightly turned away, but recognizable. District Attorney Robert Lanning. Sarah froze. Lanning had been the prosecuting attorney during Harrison's term. He'd later become state attorney, and now he oversaw half the cold case division's funding, including hers. Suddenly, the walls of the department felt closer, the air heavier. She was surrounded by ghosts, and not all of them were dead. She printed the image, marked both men with red pen, and drove straight to Springfield, to the state archives. She didn't call ahead, didn't sign in under her name. The clerk on duty, an old friend from academy days, let her in quietly. "What are you looking for?" he whispered. "Original McKinney evidence logs," she said. "The ones before they went digital." He frowned. "Those are sealed." "Then unseal them." An hour later, she was staring at the original chain of custody sheet. The ink was faded but legible. Beside the evidence label for item #3, cassette tape McKinney interview, #2, there was an unfamiliar signature. Not Harrison, not Hale. R. Lanning. Sarah's stomach turned. The district attorney himself had handled physical evidence from a murder investigation. That was unheard of, improper, illegal. The cover-up wasn't a rumor, it was an ecosystem. Lanning, Harrison, Hale. The trinity that had locked away a dead girl's voice for 3 decades. She copied everything she could, folded the papers into her coat, and left. But as she stepped outside, a black SUV was idling at the end of the parking lot. No plates, tinted windows. Her instincts kicked in. She turned the other way, walked calmly until she reached her car, then sped off. For the next 20 minutes, the SUV stayed 2 cars behind, never close enough to confront, never far enough to ignore. When she turned east toward Route 54, it turned too. When she slowed, it slowed. She cut across a side road and pulled into a diner parking lot. The SUV passed by, then stopped 100 feet ahead. Her phone buzzed, unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Detective Collins," a man's voice said. Smooth, controlled, too calm. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "Who is this? You already know." The line clicked dead. Sarah sat in silence, hand trembling around the phone. Her reflection in the windshield looked foreign. Someone older, more fragile, consumed by a story that no longer belonged to her. But she couldn't stop. She drove home the long way, checking her mirrors every few seconds. When she finally pulled into her driveway, the SUV was gone. Inside, the apartment felt wrong again, the air stale, too still. She scanned the room, nothing out of place. But when she sat down, she noticed the faint outline of a handprint on her kitchen counter. Wet, fresh. She reached for her gun. The silence deepened. And then the radio on her desk crackled to life, the same old police band she hadn't used in weeks. A voice broke through, low, distorted, impossible. She didn't drown. Her blood ran cold. Who is this? She whispered into the static. You're looking in the wrong grave. Then silence. Sarah stared at the radio pulse racing. Wrong grave. She drove back to the McKinney property. Before sunrise, the world still frozen and gray. The forensics tape fluttered weakly in the wind. She stepped under it, boots crunching through snow. The site was sealed off, the excavation team gone, the hole filled and leveled. She stopped where this barrel had been found, staring at the churned earth. Her flashlight caught something glinting under the frost, a fragment of glass. She crouched, brushed the snow aside, and found a small jar half buried in mud. Inside, preserved under cloudy water, was a photograph. It showed 3 people, Laura, Michael, and a little girl between them. On the back in faded ink, one word, Lily. Sarah's breath fogged the glass. The child wasn't some secret birth buried decades ago. She'd lived long enough to be photographed, long enough to be loved. And if the voice on the radio was right, she hadn't died in 1981. She'd been buried after. Sarah's phone buzzed again. A text, no number. Find her grave before they do. She felt a wave of nausea. Her hands shook as she zoomed in on the photo. Behind the 3 figures was a distinct landmark, a weathered oak tree with a metal gate and a wooden sign, barely legible, Ridgeview Cemetery, the town's oldest burial ground. Sarah didn't wait. She drove straight there, headlights cutting through the fog. The cemetery gates creaked as she pushed them open. The ground was frozen solid tombstones jutting out like teeth. She followed the winding path until she found it, the oak from the photo, its trunk scarred and hollow. The soil beneath it looked disturbed not from decades past, but recent. Someone had dug here. Her flashlight beam trembled as she knelt and brushed away loose dirt. Beneath the surface, a piece of stone caught the light, a grave marker. It wasn't old. The date carved into it was from 2 years ago. LM 1981-2019. Lily McKinney. Her body had been moved, reburied under a false date. Sarah staggered back, the world spinning around her. She looked up and froze. Someone was standing by the gate, a tall figure in a dark coat face shadowed by the fog, watching her. She raised her gun. Police, show me your hands. The figure didn't move. Sarah took a step forward, but before she could speak again, headlights flashed from behind, blinding white. A car roared to life. The figure turned, slipping into the fog as tires screamed against ice. Sarah ran after them, the snow crunching under her boots. But by the time she reached the road, the car was gone, taillights vanishing into the dark. In the stillness that followed, her phone buzzed once more. One new message. Too late. She looked back at the grave, the disturbed soil, the name, the lie carved in stone, and realized she wasn't chasing ghosts anymore. Someone alive was rewriting the story, and they were one step ahead. Snow had turned to freezing rain by the time Detective Sarah Collins reached her car. The windshield was coated in ice, the air thick and silent. Every nerve in her body screamed that she shouldn't be there, not at that hour, not alone, not after what she'd just seen. But she couldn't drive away. Not yet. The grave beneath the old oak told her one thing with certainty. Lily McKinney hadn't died in 1981. She'd lived, hidden, and someone had gone to great lengths to make sure no one ever knew. The headstone was too new, the carving too clean. Whoever moved her body or planted one had done it recently. Sarah's flashlight beam trembled as she crouched near the grave again. The soil was still loose under the frost. She brushed her glove over the surface. The top layer crumbled easily. Then she saw it, a glint of something metallic just below the dirt. She dug with her hands until she unearthed a small brass locket identical to the one Laura used to wear. Inside, a photo torn in half. On one side, a woman's face, Laura. On the other, missing entirely. Sarah felt the world tilt. Someone had buried this intentionally, like a message. She tucked the locket into her pocket, heart hammering, and stood. The rain was falling harder now, each drop stinging against her face. She scanned the cemetery one last time, but whoever had been watching her was gone. Back in her car, she turned the heat on full blast, her breath shaking. On the passenger seat lay the photograph she'd found near Miller's Creek, Laura, Michael, and Lily. She stared at it, the raindrops distorting their faces through the glass. A family built on secrets, a legacy buried under guilt. As she started the engine, her headlights caught something in the rearview mirror movement at the far edge of the cemetery, a figure standing motionless among the graves, then gone. She didn't look back again. By morning, she was at the lab. The rain had washed the world clean, but not her thoughts. She handed the locket to the forensic team for analysis and requested an urgent exhumation order for Lily McKinney's grave. The clerk hesitated. "That grave's already been processed," he said. "By who?" "State investigator," the clerk replied, checking his monitor. "Authorization code from the cold case division. Same day you found it." Sarah leaned forward. "What investigator?" The clerk scrolled. The name appeared on the screen. Detective Sarah Collins. Her own name, her own signature. Her mouth went dry. "That's impossible." He shrugged. "The order's logged and verified. You signed it at 6:22 a.m. At 6:22, she'd still been at the cemetery. She felt her pulse quicken. Someone was using her credentials, accessing her files, moving her evidence. And now they were rewriting her. She left without another word, her boots echoing down the hallway. Outside, the wind had picked up, slashing through her coat. She couldn't go back to the precinct, not with her badge now tied to whatever was happening. She drove instead to the one place left untouched, Laura McKinney's old house. The property was still there, boarded up, forgotten. The for sale sign was long gone, but the porch sagged the way time makes everything surrender. She stepped inside. The air smelled of rot and dust, but under it all, faintly something floral, lavender, the kind of scent that lingers in fabric long after the person's gone. She moved through the room's slowly, flashlight slicing through the darkness. The furniture was covered with white sheets, ghosts frozen in place. The living room floor creaked beneath her boots, and there, under a sheet, she saw a piano, the lid half open. On the keys, a single note sat, yellow paper, one line written in sharp, deliberate strokes. "You found her once. Don't find her again." Sarah's throat tightened. Her flashlight flickered once, twice, then died. She tapped it. Nothing. The house was dark again. And then somewhere upstairs, a floorboard groaned. She drew her gun eyes fixed on the staircase. Police. No answer. Another creak. She moved slowly up the steps, her hand steady, despite the tremor in her chest. The hallway above was narrow wallpaper, peeling the air colder than below. Doors lined the corridor, all closed. At the end, one was slightly open. Light flickered from inside, soft and pulsing. Sarah pushed it open with her foot. The room was small, a child's room. The wallpaper was faded pink, the shelves lined with dolls whose eyes had lost their shine. The air smelled like dust and decay. In the center of the room was a small tape recorder, playing. Static filled the space, low and rhythmic. Then a voice. She wasn't supposed to die here. Sarah froze. The voice was male. Not Michael, not Hale, different, rougher, older. They said they'd move her. But they didn't. They left her in the ground like trash. The recording clicked off. Sarah stood there in silence, her pulse roaring in her ears. On the wall above the bed, faint letters had been written in red marker barely visible through the dust. She raised her flashlight. "I remember." The words were scrawled in a child's handwriting. Her hand shook as she snapped a photo. Then, beneath the window, she noticed a loose floorboard. She knelt, pried it open, and found a small box wrapped in fabric. Inside, Polaroids, dozens of them. Laura smiling, Laura with Lily, Laura at the creek. Then Laura arguing with two men outside the house. One of them was unmistakable Sheriff Harrison. The other Robert Lanning. They were standing near a truck, gesturing toward the woods. The timestamp on the photo read July 14th, 1990. The night she died. Sarah's breath caught. Her phone vibrated, unknown number again, a photo message. She opened it, a picture of her own car parked outside the McKinney house, taken from across the street. No text, just an image. Her pulse spiked. Someone was watching. She turned off her flashlight and moved to the window. Across the street behind the line of dead trees, she saw a faint glow, the tip of a cigarette, burning in the dark. Then it vanished. She didn't wait. She grabbed the box of Polaroids, stuffed them into her coat, and ran to her car. The street was empty. The silence felt thick enough to choke on. Back on the highway, she drove, fast headlights cutting through the storm. The world blurred around her, the trees, the road, the endless white. She could still hear the recording in her head, that broken voice. They said they'd move her. But Who was they? As she sped through the dark, her phone buzzed again. Another message. This time a single sentence. You're getting close. She almost didn't see the figure in the road until it was too late. She slammed the brakes. The car skidded tires screaming on ice. She swerved hard, the vehicle spinning headlights, flashing over the figure, a child barefoot, standing in the snow. Then impact. Metal against earth. The car spun into the ditch. When the world stopped moving, Sarah sat gripping the wheel chest, heaving heart-hammering. Steam rose from the hood. The windshield was cracked. She looked up, but the road was empty. No child, no footprints, nothing. The only sound was the soft hiss of static from her radio, a voice faint, distant. Don't let them bury me again. Sarah pressed her hands to her face, trembling. Somewhere in the darkness, the past was waking up. And it wasn't finished with her yet. The car was still steaming when Detective Sarah Collins stumbled out into the night. The snow around her was streaked with tire marks and shards of glass that glinted like ice knives under the headlights. The cold hit her lungs hard, sharp enough to cut. She looked back, toward the road. No one there. No sound. No footprints. Just emptiness stretching out in both directions. But she had seen her, the little girl, barefoot, standing in the road like something half remembered from a nightmare. Sarah gripped the edge of the car door, trying to steady her breathing. Every instinct told her to call it in to get backup to explain the crash. But what would she say? I swerved to avoid a ghost. The department already thought she was unraveling. Instead, she reached for the Polaroid box on the passenger seat, still intact despite the crash. She sat back down behind the wheel and began flipping through the photos, fingers trembling. There were 32 in total. Laura smiling with books at the library. Laura walking Lily to school. Laura standing at the edge of the creek with her brother Michael beside her. Expression unreadable. Then she found one she hadn't noticed before. It was darker, taken indoors, lit by a single lamp. Laura again, but this time she wasn't smiling. Her eyes were swollen, her expression tense. Behind her on the wall, a calendar. July 1990. And next to her, on the edge of the frame, a man's hand resting on her shoulder. Large, calloused. Wearing a signet ring engraved with 3 initials, RLH. Sarah's heart stopped. Robert Lanning, Paul Harrison, Richard Hale. All 3 initials, 1 ring. The Trinity. She turned the photo over. On the back, written in pencil. If I disappear, show them this. The edges were smudged as if someone had handled it again and again before hiding it. Sarah's hands shook as she tucked it into her coat. The cold was seeping deeper into her bones. She needed to move. The car was totaled smoke curling from the engine. She grabbed her phone, no signal. The crash must have knocked out the antenna. The nearest town was 6 miles away. She pulled her coat tighter and started walking. The night was black, the air electric, the sound of her boots crunching the only proof she was still part of the living world. Half a mile in, her phone buzzed. Just once. No caller ID. She answered anyway. Who is this? Silence. Then a whisper. You shouldn't have found the box. Her blood ran cold. What do you want? To finish what she started. The line went dead. Sarah stopped in the middle of the road, scanning the darkness around her. Nothing but snow. She started running. By the time she reached the gas station at the edge of town, her breath was ragged. The neon sign buzzed faintly overhead. Inside, the lone clerk looked up, startled. Rough night, he asked. You could say that she replied, forcing calm. She asked for a phone. The landline worked. She called the only person she trusted left in the department, Lieutenant Grace Miller, one of the few who had believed her when the case reopened. Grace, it's me, she said, voice trembling. I found something. You need to come get me. Where are you? Route 9 gas station outside Ridgeview. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Sarah hung up her reflection, flickering in the glass door. She poured a coffee and sat near the window, trying to slow her heartbeat. But she couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on her. 10 minutes passed, then 15. The snow outside thickened. She glanced up and froze. A car was pulling into the lot, not a squad car, a black SUV, the same one from before. The clerk looked up, frowning. You expecting someone? Sarah didn't answer. Her hand drifted toward her weapon. The SUV idled for a moment, headlights glaring into the store. Then the driver's door opened. A man stepped out tall, wearing a dark coat. His face was hidden in the shadow of the light. Sarah's phone buzzed again. One message. "Stay where you are." The man started walking toward the door. Sarah moved fast. She pushed through the back exit, slipping into the alley behind the station. Her boots slid on the ice as she ran. The wind cut through her coat like knives. She heard the front door of the gas station open. Then the muffled sound of the clerk shouting something, followed by a single gunshot. Sarah didn't look back. She ran until her legs burned, until the glow of the gas station was gone, swallowed by the storm. She reached a small bridge at the edge of the woods and ducked beneath it, crouching low, gun drawn. Her breath came out in clouds. The silence returned. Then faintly the crunch of footsteps above her, slow, deliberate. She gripped her gun tighter, every muscle locked. The footsteps stopped. Then in the stillness she heard a sound that made her blood freeze. A child's voice. "He's here." Sarah turned sharply, flashlight slicing through the dark. Nothing. Just falling snow. Then a second voice, older male, echoing faintly from the bridge above. "She's not getting out of this one." Sarah crawled backward, heart hammering. 2 sets of boots crossed the bridge, then faded into the night. When she finally dared to move, she was shaking so badly she could barely reload. Her fingers were numb. The Polaroid box slipped from her pocket and scattered into the snow. She grabbed as many as she could, but one fell into the water, drifting under the ice. She watched it float away, spinning slowly until it disappeared under the surface. By the time Grace arrived, sirens flashing, Sarah was crouched by the creek, soaked and trembling. "What the hell happened?" Grace shouted, running toward her. Sarah handed her the photograph with the ring. "They're all in it, Grace. Harrison Hale Lanning." Laura knew. That's why she died. Grace looked at the photo, then back at her. "Where'd you get this?" Sarah hesitated. "Laura's house." Grace's expression shifted. "Sarah?" "Laura's house burned down years ago." The words hit like a slap. "No, I was there. I found her note, her room, the piano." Grace cut her off. "The McKinney property was condemned in 2002. There's nothing left but a foundation." Sarah stared at her, the world tilting. "That's impossible." Grace reached out gently. "You need to rest. You've been running on no sleep for days. Let's get you checked out." But Sarah couldn't move. She looked down at the Polaroid, still clutched in her hand, the one with the initials on the ring. She turned it toward the headlights. The image was gone. The photo was blank, completely white. Sarah's throat went dry. She looked at Grace. "It was here. I swear it was here." Grace's voice softened. "Sarah, maybe you've been seeing what you want to see." "No," Sarah said, shaking her head. "Someone doesn't want this case reopened. They're erasing it, piece by piece." Grace stepped closer. "Then let's talk about it. Somewhere safe." Sarah hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Okay." They walked toward Grace's car, snow crunching beneath their feet. As they reached the door, Sarah glanced down and froze. On the dashboard, half buried in frost, lay a cigarette butt. The same brand the watcher outside Laura's house had smoked. Grace noticed her hesitation. Something wrong. Sarah's pulse thundered. "You tell me," she said quietly, "you don't smoke." Grace's hand hovered near her jacket. "Sarah, get in the car." Sarah took a step back, gun still holstered but ready. "Who sent you here?" Grace's eyes darkened. "You shouldn't have gone back to that house." The words hit like ice. Sarah drew her gun. "Who are you working for?" Grace smiled faintly. "For the ones who keep the town quiet." A shot rang out, sharp, close. Glass shattered. Sarah dropped, rolled, fired back twice. The windshield exploded. Grace staggered, blood blooming across her coat. She fell sideways into the snow. Sarah crawled toward her heart, pounding gun still raised. Grace was gasping, her voice weak but clear. "You don't understand. It never ended." Sarah leaned closer. "What never ended?" Grace coughed, blood spilling onto the snow. "The children. There were more." Her eyes glazed over. Sarah looked up the world, spinning, the snow falling thicker, now muffling everything. More children, more graves. The truth wasn't buried under one creek. It stretched across the entire town. And somewhere in that white silence, someone was still out there, finishing the job. The sirens never came. Detective Sarah Collins sat in the snow beside Grace Miller's body, her ears ringing from the gunshots, her breath coming out in ragged bursts. The snow was turning pink around them, flakes melting into blood. The world was silent, except for the wind, that low, endless moan that made every sound feel swallowed. Her radio crackled weakly. Dispatch calling her name. She didn't answer. If she did, they'd trace her location. They'd come here, and she didn't know anymore who they really were. She looked down at Grace, her friend, her mentor, her betrayer. The snow settled on Grace's open eyes, the last words still echoing in Sarah's mind. The children. There were more. More graves, more lies. Sarah's hands shook as she reached for Grace's coat. Inside the pocket, she found a folded piece of paper sealed in a plastic sleeve. It was an old report dated July 20th, 1990. Title, Missing Person Minor Female, Estimated Age, 910. No name, no follow-up, no closure. The report was signed by Sheriff Harrison, co-signed by Captain Hale, and underfiled to District Attorney a name that burned into Sarah's vision, Robert Lanning. She knew then that Laura hadn't been the only one silenced that summer. The McKinney land wasn't just a dumping ground for industrial waste. It had been a burial ground for children. She stood snow soaking into her knees. Every breath burned. Every instinct screamed to run to get out of that town and never look back. But she couldn't. Not when so many voices were still buried under the ice. Sarah reached for Grace's car keys. Her hands were numb, the metal cold against her skin. She started the engine headlights cutting through the darkness. As she pulled out, she saw movement in the rearview mirror figures at the edge of the woods, black silhouettes watching from between the trees. She didn't stop. She drove for miles, the town disappearing behind her, swallowed by the snow. The highway stretched ahead, endless, white, empty. But even as the distance grew, she could feel it following her, that sense that the story wasn't done with her yet. At dawn, she reached Springfield. The sky was pale gray, the horizon bruised with storm clouds. She parked behind the old courthouse, the same one where the McKinney case files had been processed. She needed proof, something she could show, something that couldn't vanish, couldn't be erased. Inside the courthouse was quiet, too early for anyone but the janitors and clerks. She made her way to the archives in the basement, swiping her badge at the security door. It buzzed open. The air inside was dry and stale, thick with dust. Rows of shelves stretched into the dark, filled with boxes marked by decade and case number. She followed the 1990 section flashlight, trembling in her hand, until she reached the row labeled Unsolved Miscellaneous. The McKinney file should have been there. It wasn't. Her stomach dropped. She ran her light across the boxes, nothing. Then she saw it. A gap in the row, a single box missing. On the metal shelf where it had once sat was a small folded note. Handwritten. Stop digging. Her pulse spiked. She turned, scanning the aisles, nothing. Then a sound, footsteps, slow, measured, coming from the far end of the corridor. Sarah drew her weapon flashlight aimed straight ahead. Who's there? No answer. Just the echo of boots on concrete. She stepped forward, every nerve alive. The sound grew louder, closer, until it stopped just beyond the light's reach. She inched forward another step, and the lights flickered on all at once. Standing 10 feet away was Robert Lanning. Older now, white hair, thick coat, eyes as calm as ever. He smiled faintly. You look tired, Detective. Sarah's grip tightened on her gun. You killed her. You killed them all. He shook his head almost sadly. You really think this started with me? I inherited it, just like they did. Her jaw clenched. Harrison, Hale, Grace, they worked for you. They worked for the town, Lanning said softly. For the people who didn't want the truth to poison everything. You think anyone wanted to know? You think anyone could live here if they did? Sarah's voice shook. They were children. His expression didn't change. And they were dying long before we buried them. The plant was dumping waste into the river. The families got sick. Kids born deformed, half alive. No one wanted to admit it. So they paid us to make it disappear. He took a step closer. And it worked. For 30 years. Sarah's finger trembled on the trigger. You killed Laura because she found out. He paused. We didn't kill her. We just didn't save her. For a moment, everything stopped. The hum of the lights, the sound of her own breath, the cold pressing against her skin. Lanning smiled again, slow and hollow. You can shoot me if you want, but it won't matter. There are copies of everything, every report, every burial, every name. You can't stop what's already in motion. Sarah took a step forward. Then where are they? He met her eyes. Everywhere. Then he dropped something at his feet, a lighter. She saw the flames spark. Her stomach dropped. The floor exploded in light and heat. Gasoline, she smelled it just as the fire bloomed along the rows of boxes. The whole archive ignited in seconds. Sarah dove behind a metal cabinet, the blast wave knocking the breath out of her. She coughed, eyes-burning flames roaring around her. The shelves collapsed, documents turning to ash in the air. Through the smoke, she saw Lanning walking calmly toward the exit coat, catching sparks, the fire reflecting in his eyes. Sarah crawled after him, choking lungs filling with smoke. She stumbled out through a side door into the snow collapsing on the concrete. The cold air hit her like a knife. Behind her, the courthouse burned, a towering inferno devouring every piece of truth she'd fought to find. Lanning was gone. She lay there for a long time, watching the flames rise into the morning sky. Sirens wailed in the distance. Her radio buzzed again, crackling through the static. "Detective Collins, do you copy?" She didn't answer. She pulled something from her coat pocket, the Polaroid with the initials. It was blackened at the edges, now the image nearly gone. But under the soot, one thing remained, the faint outline of a little girl's face. Lily. Sarah closed her eyes. The smoke curled above her, twisting into the shape of a child's silhouette before dissolving into the wind. Then her phone buzzed one last time. A message. No number, no name. "You can't burn what's buried." She stared at it, her reflection trembling in the screen eyes, hollow face smeared with soot. The courthouse behind her kept burning, the snow melting into ash around her. And in the flames, she thought she saw them. Laura, Lily, all the others standing just beyond the light, silent, watching, waiting for what came next. The courthouse was nothing but a blackened skeleton by the time the fire crews arrived. Flames had turned the records of 3 generations into dust. The air smelled of smoke and secrets, and in the middle of it all, Detective Sarah Collins stood alone, her coat streaked with ash, her eyes hollow, watching the embers drift through the gray dawn like pieces of a dying truth. She didn't speak to anyone. The officers moved around her, voices muffled, radios crackling, the hum of chaos wrapped in cold morning air. Someone asked if she was injured. She shook her head. Someone else asked if she'd seen the suspect. She said nothing. Because who would believe her now? That a man had confessed to crimes buried before she was even born, that ghosts spoke through static, that every trail led to an empty file cabinet and a dead signature. She was the last one left who knew what really burned in those flames, and the only one who still cared. By mid-afternoon, the fire was declared an accident. Faulty wiring in the archive basement, the report said. Convenient, efficient, final. Sarah sat on the hood of her car, wrapped in a blanket, sipping coffee that tasted like metal. The paramedic offered to take her to the hospital for smoke inhalation. She refused. She wasn't hurt, she was haunted. In her pocket, the phone buzzed again, one last time. The screen flickered with a message that had no sender. You can still dig. No number, no trace. But attached was a single file, an image. It was a photograph, aerial, black and white. Farmland, long and flat. She recognized it instantly, the McKinney property. But not as it looked now. As it looked 35 years ago. Before the creek was fenced off, before the refinery. Before the town started pretending not to see what it had built on poisoned ground. There were markings on the photo, faint white X's scattered across the land, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, each one a grave. Sarah's hands went cold. The file metadata showed the upload time 03:17 a.m., the same minute the courthouse fire alarms went off. Someone had saved the evidence, someone who wanted her to see. She got in her car and drove. The roads were clear now, the world blank and silent under a sheet of snow. She followed the coordinates embedded in the photo miles of highway, then dirt, then forest. The path ended near the farthest corner of the old McKinney property, beyond the creek where no one ever built or farmed again. The air there was still, too still. She stepped out, boots sinking into fresh snow. Her breath hung in the air. The trees around her leaned inward, skeletal, like witnesses. She followed the map on her phone, each X leading her deeper into the field. Then she saw them. Uneven patches in the snow, small mounds rising just enough to disturb the perfect white. She knelt beside one, brushed away the frost. Beneath it, a small wooden cross, weathered gray. No name, no date, just silence. She moved to another, and another, and another. Each one marked the same way, nameless, forgotten. The snow began to fall harder. Thick, heavy flakes clung to her lashes. Somewhere behind her, something creaked the sound of old metal shifting under weight. She turned. At the edge of the clearing stood a rusted sign half buried in ice. She scraped the snow from it with her glove. Harrison Industrial Waste Restricted Site. The land itself had been fenced, then sealed, then erased from maps. A cemetery disguised as contamination. Sarah stood there, heart pounding. This was what Laura had found. This was what she died trying to expose. And now it was awake again. She pulled out her phone and started taking pictures, every cross, every marking, every trace of what they'd buried. Her fingers were numb, her breath shallow. When she reached the last mound, something caught her eye, a glimmer beneath the snow. She dug with her bare hands until she found it, a small metal tag, tarnished but still legible. Stamped letters, LM-2. Her heart stuttered. Lily McKinney. But #2? There'd been another. She turned the tag over and gasped. Etched crudely into the back was a single word, help. A sound behind her, soft, deliberate, almost a whisper. She spun, gun raised. Nothing. Only the snow, the trees, the endless white. Then faintly a child's laugh, distant but clear. Sarah's breath caught. She turned in slow circles, the world blurring. The laugh echoed again, closer this time. Lily, she whispered. The air thickened. The wind rose, carrying voices that weren't wind at all. Whispers layered over one another, rising, overlapping, impossible to separate. Names, please. The sound built until it was almost a scream. Sarah dropped to her knees, hands pressed to her ears. "What do you want from me?" she shouted into the storm. And for a moment the noise stopped. Then one voice, small, steady, impossibly close, answered. "Don't let them forget." The words hung in the air, fragile and clear. Sarah lowered her hands, eyes wide. The snow around her had changed, disturbed in every direction, as if hundreds of tiny footprints had appeared all at once. She stared at them, frozen. Then slowly, she lifted her phone. The camera captured the scene, the snow, the crosses, the footprints fading into the white. She hit record, whispering into the microphone. "This is Detective Sarah Collins, Illinois State Police. The McKinney site contains multiple unmarked graves. Coordinates attached." The cold burned her skin, but she didn't stop. She sent the video to every contact she had. Journalists, state investigators, even anonymous Dropboxes. The signal flickered, but the message went through. Her phone buzzed once, then died. Battery gone. The snow fell harder now, erasing the ground, the crosses, the tracks, everything but her. Sarah stood there until the wind swallowed the sound of her own breathing. Somewhere in the distance, sirens began to wail. She turned toward them, eyes narrow, mouth set. This time she wouldn't run. If the town wanted silence, they'd have to bury her too. As the first red lights pierced the white horizon, she whispered the words she'd been chasing since the beginning, a promise to the dead, to Laura, to Lily, to all of them. Not alone. The wind carried it away, a single truth swirling into the storm. And when the rescuers reached the field hours later, they found no one. Only footprints circling the graves, ending where the snow was smooth again. The case file they opened weeks later would never be closed. Because some truths once unearthed refused to stay buried.